Welcome and thank you for joining us in our webinar today. This is Knowing What to Ask When It Comes to Web Development, which is a very large mouthful of a title for a webinar. My name is Bethany Morse. I'm the Business Development Manager for Mugo Web, and this is part of a series of webinars that we have done over the past couple of years for public libraries. Mugo Web, of course, is a full development team. We work on many projects, but we have a lot of experience with libraries in particular. I myself was a public librarian for 16 years, so a lot of my role is helping liaise with our library clients and providing them resources to get the most out of their web development. So that is what this topic is about today. So a little bit of the context about why this is such a mouthful, why we are doing this. Many libraries have very strict budget constraints. We understand this. And we know that means in a lot of cases, websites get put on the back burner and become less of a priority. And what that means practically for library staff is that as librarians in your career, you might only get the chance to run one web development project over that span of your career, which means you don't get a lot of experience in knowing how these work, what you're doing, what can you ask for, what are the options that are available when it comes to web development. So at the end of all of our projects, we always ask our clients for feedback, what we can do to help prepare them better, those types of things. And this is something that's come up a lot with our clients where they said, this was great, but we wish we had known more about what web development, what occurs before we started. So our goal today isn't to empower libraries to understand more about this process and to be able to get the most out of their projects. If you're only running one web development project in your career as a librarian, you want to make sure that it's great. You want to make sure that you are getting the absolute most out of it that you can for your library and to maximize what is oftentimes a very large budget expenditure. So that's the context about why we are presenting it. Some of the things we're going to be covering today is we're going to talk about some common terms, web development terms. We're going to be talking about what the life cycle of a web development project is, what you can expect at each of those stages, and what you should be asking and preparing for at those stages. And then we're also going to get some advice from librarians and developers that have been presented. At the end, there will be an opportunity for questions. If you have questions as we go along, you are welcome to submit them in the chat box. Those come to me directly. We will also be providing the video of this afterwards, and this session will be available on demand. So first of all, development terms. This is in no way a comprehensive list of different development terms. I merely am picking what I get the most questions about in different library projects. Something I have learned is that both developers and librarians alike are very guilty of using acronyms willy-nilly and just expecting everyone to know what we're talking about, when in many cases we haven't bothered to define those. So again, this is a very rudimentary list of development terms, but what we get questions on over the course of a project. So first up is accessibility. And I have used the developer shorthand here, which is A11Y. That just means that between the A and Y of that word accessibility, there are 11 other letters. So this is a little bit of shorthand, but when you see that, it means accessibility. And accessibility is something that is incredibly important to websites, particularly library websites. So if that isn't something on your radar to be considering when you're going into a web development project, you need to make sure it is. Your website should be equitably available to all who need to access it, regardless of disabilities or limitations they might have using traditional tools like a keyboard or computer or other things like that. API means application programming interface. This is usually provided by third parties and provides a way for developers to build integrations with third-party services into a website as well. We're going to be discussing that a lot as we go through this session. Backend, this is not an official definition. There are different definitions for front end and back end, but over the course of a project, this is typically how it will be used when just thrown about. So the back end is the part of the website that the public, the patrons in this case, are not interacting with. So oftentimes here, what we're actually talking about is the CMS, which is the content management system. That is the interface that allows you to update the content on your site and customize it, and how you as a site administrator interact with your website to publish. CRM. This is a customer relation management system. This is separate from the CMS. Not all libraries use a CRM, but often enough they are asking about features that are related to a CRM, so I've included it in here. This is a third-party service typically, and this is something that helps you manage communication, digital communication with patrons or customers coming through the website. So this could manage emails, this could manage newsletters, this could manage and track leads as far as this person has requested this, we're working on this for them, those types of things. CTA, this is just a call to action. This is like a button or something on a website that you want someone to do after they have read the content. This could be, like I said, a button. It could be a block. It could be a feature. It could be a number of things. But that's a term that oftentimes I realize nobody but developers know what that means when it's said. Front end, this is the opposite of the back end. This is the published part of your website that's accessible by patrons and how they are interacting with it. MVP, minimal viable product. We'll talk about this a couple of places, but especially when we're talking about budgeting and developing new features, sometimes you have a deadline and you know that you're not going to roll out all the features at once, but instead you are going to create what is this MVP, the minimal viable product, exactly what you need to get this up and running and have the base level of features for it. Scope is one of the things we will talk about the most because these are the boundaries of a project. This is the requirements. This is the agreed upon structure of what is going to be developed. The scope encompasses all of the requirements, the security requirements, the features, the integrations, all of that. And it is very important to have a clear understanding of what the scope is before you head into a project. QA is quality assurance. This is testing you do over the course of a project to make sure everything is functioning as promised and you are getting the appropriate deliverables for this. Now, these two terms I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about because it is very easy to confuse these two, primarily because they go back and forth a lot. So we are talking about user interfaces and user experience. So kind of the best way I can describe this is user interface is what you have designed. These are the physical elements of the design, the look, the style, the navigation of the site. And the user experience is how satisfied a user is after they have interacted with the user interface. But as I said, these go back and forth a lot. So the user experience is a lot of pre-planning and thought and development for how you want to design the user interface. And then you design the user interface to provide the best user experience. So there's flow back and forth between those, but particularly for library projects, a lot of time the UX design that you are thinking about is going to happen early on in the process, in kind of your ideation phase. All right, so what can you expect from a web development partner when you are going into a new development project? I want to frame this in what are the library's responsibilities and what are your developer responsibilities. So first of all, let's talk about what is your responsibility as a library stakeholder for this. First of all, it's important that you know that this is your website. You are going to own this final product. You are paying for this service and you deserve to get the best product possible for what you are paying. You have a responsibility to plan this out and think about this thoroughly and execute it in such a way that it provides the most value for your patrons. You own the content of your site. You should feel comfortable going into it and editing it and adding new content and changing your menu. Your website is crucial to how you interact with your patrons. As much as we want everyone to go and visit their local library, we know that in some cases, you are only ever going to interact with some members of your community digitally. They're only going to ever access your website and download books from Overdrive or check something out from Hoopla. And you want to make sure that your website provides them with what they need easily and hopefully encourages them to come into the building as well. But you need to treat your website as an integral part of your library and your functions. You are also responsible, of course, for your workflows. How does your library work? You know this better than anyone else. You know what the staff structure is. You know what is necessary for staff to know and do to provide the services. When it comes to your website, you're responsible for determining who has access to it, who on staff does what, and determining what each person needs to know to be able to collaboratively work and make sure that your site remains current. You are responsible when it comes to a web development project for clearly communicating your needs. So as we've already said, you know your library better than anyone else. You need to make sure that you are presenting that to your development partner so that they know exactly not only what your website needs to do, but why, because that why will determine how they develop and what features are going to be available. And then also, you're responsible for setting the scope. This is something that happens well before the project starts. You need to know what you need and what you're expecting from this project. And as the project goes through, you need to know that this is something you kind of need to stick to for many reasons, for your budget, for the sake of the launch date, and just for the overall process itself. So what does that leave for your developer? Your developer's primary responsibility at the start of the project is to listen to you and understand what your goals are. They need to understand the full scope, but really getting to know you, getting to know what your requirements are and why you need these things for your website is going to help your developer provide the best possible solution, because the developer is responsible for the deliverables, for the final product, and this needs to be the best solution possible, which sometimes isn't necessarily what you initially imagine. Over the course of the development project, the developer is going to be responsible for providing you with accurate information about not only what is happening, but what potential roadblocks are, and also providing you with these are standards, these are industry best practices, these are what we recommend based upon your needs. It's we know that, again, librarians, you're not doing a lot of web development projects probably. So that's on us. We're here to let you know how all of this works and communicate it clearly throughout the entire process. And then equally responsible, if no, not more, the developer is responsible for protecting from that scope creep, which is just where things keep getting added on to a project as you go along. It's very important to limit this so that you remain on budget, you remain on time, and you are not dragging out a process or creating more issues that are limiting getting this to your patrons. So this is something I put on both the library and the developer, equally important to be aware of. And then the other thing I will say about this is a lot of the developer's responsibilities, you might notice, really have more to do with good customer service and what you should expect from any contract or partner you're looking for. A lot of times that gets left out of development. Mugo Web in particular prides ourselves on providing really excellent customer service, and you as a library should expect that from all of your technology partners. All right, so the life cycle of a project, what actually is happening over the course of this? There's two different types of projects we're going to look at. Primarily what we're talking about today is a full new website project. So this is complete redesign, brand new site, starting from scratch on everything. It's going to be comprehensive features beginning to end. The other one here is the developing a new feature for an existing site. So we'll talk about this one a little bit later at the end, but the way you can kind of consider it is with a new website project, you're bringing on oftentimes a new development partner, and you're catching them up. This is a much longer process. And when you are developing a new feature for existing site, oftentimes, but not always, you already have that established development partner you're working for. You already have a shorthand and an understanding of how those projects flow and what that development might look like. But this is an example of what a typical library project might look at. Today, we're going to be focusing on the discovery through launch portion of this, but I do want to call out the ideation and the partner selection process, which are the library's responsibility at the start of any of these projects, are incredibly important, especially when you are talking about all of the work ahead of time that you need to do to create a smooth development project at the end. I will also point out that we have done other webinars that might be helpful. If you are looking for more information on those, we've done webinars on how to audit your website to see what you need to improve, and RFPs on how to write, webinars on how to write RFPs as well. You'll notice also that a lot of these kind of happen concurrently. So we start out with discovery. The development is going to be taking place while design and training and testing and other things are going on. When you're talking about how long this process might take, if you start from ideation to launch, you're talking about probably 2 years of work for a project, because that ideation, and particularly if you have to go through an RFP, that's going to take a long time. You need to be prepared for that. For our typical projects, when we get into discovery to launch, 4 to 6 months. Depending on how involved and how many new features we're developing. All right, so tips for each of these different segments here, and what should you be asking along the way at each of these stages of the process? So first of all, ideation, this is where you're sitting down and asking yourself, okay, what does our site currently do? What do we wish it could do? And this is where you can expend a lot of time and planning to set yourself up for a very successful project at the end. This is where you are getting all of your ideas for scope, and you are really conceptualizing what you need out of this project. There's a lot of groundwork here. So you need to identify the stakeholders. Who's actually using your website? Who are the people who contribute to it? Who are the decision makers? Who are the people who need to have a say in what this final product is going to be? You want to make sure you're comprehensively surveying not only your patrons to see what they want out of a website, but also your staff. You need to know, how are they using it? What do they need to do better? You need to not only have those subjective surveys, which are the opinions of what everyone wants, but you need to have actual numbers. You should be looking in and auditing, okay, how many people use our website on a daily basis, on a yearly basis? Where are they going most often? What are the services they're using? How can we make those more prominent and easy for them to find? You should also be looking around for inspiration in other websites. So look at other library websites, see what they're doing. Look at things beyond library websites. What are your favorite websites that you access and why? What are the user experience things you like out of those sites? How could you incorporate that into your library website? You should be spending time documenting things like, what third-party services are you using? So this could be your ILS, this could be your CRM, this could be any authentication services you have. This could be any payment services, your discovery layer, your catalog, translation services, all the things that are currently built into your site. What are those? Who's the communication point for those? How do they work? But also, what are the services that you wish were more integrated into your website? And you should be documenting your workflow. So how again are staff using your website? What are the steps? What do you wish that those could be? When it comes to those workflows, you want to be thinking to, what could we automate on the website that is not? So I included this because we want to talk about, budget and what is worthwhile asking for to be developed that you haven't had previously. So anytime you're thinking about a new feature, and automation in particular, you need to ask yourself these questions. Would automating this increase the user experience for patrons? Would patrons use this more? Would it be easier for them? Two examples of things that we have developed are the book club kits, managing those online. Is that something that you do manually, that people have to call the library and request, or can they go online? And is there a workflow for staff to easily see those requests? Meeting room reservations are the same thing. Are you doing that in-house only, or do you have an interface where patrons can access that? So does the automation increase the value for the patrons and the usability? Does the automation decrease staff time? Does it make those workflows easier if it's online and if there are additional tools? Can you delegate more if more people have access to that? And then, is this automation actually feasible? You can look at, are there existing examples of where this has been done? Are there products that already do this? Is this something that would need to have custom development? And then how much is that development going to be? Once you start getting quotes for that, does the outcome, these benefits that you see, justify what the cost is? So those are all things you kind of want to consider during this ideation process, and then will come up later on as well. So next, as you head into the RFP process, something that it's important to note is you may not have full control over the RFP process. For a lot of libraries, you have a municipality or another entity that oversees this for transparency purposes, which means you might not have a chance to ask all of these questions, but if you do have a chance to review this, these are things you want to pay attention to. So first of all, in the RFP process, this is where you set set out the scope that your development partners, your potential proponents are going to be bidding on. So it's very important that you have comprehensively figured out all of that ahead of time. But then as you are evaluating responses, some things you want to look at are, okay, what are the experience level of these different proponents? Have they done this type of thing before? Do they work with libraries or do they work with other agencies? What is the flexibility of the solution they are offering? Is it a custom development? Is this something they are going to build for us particular to our needs? That's going to give you a lot more options as you go through for things you can adjust or really tailor to your library. Or is this an out of the box or off the shelf, meaning what they're offering is what we get. They're going to reskin it for us so it looks like our library, and that's great, but then that's what we have. And then you also want to look at the level of support that's being offered here. What I recommend asking at the forefront of all of this here is, can you see this person that you were evaluating to work on a project with? Can you see them as someone that you can work with long term? Is this something that a couple years down the road, if you need to adjust something on your website, you can go back to these people? Is this something you can have a working relationship? Your development agency, your whoever you're contracting here should be a partner. They really should care and understand about your needs. So things to consider there. All right, discovery. This is after you've selected a partner. This is the first part of the development process where you come down and you really go through that scope and understand exactly what the requirements are. The RFP process is usually limited. You've got a written list of requirements. There's only a couple of questions proponents can ask, and they write their response based on that. This is where you have back and forth, where you are really determining what the needs are and how they are going to work. So what you are asking at this point is, what do all of these parties involved need to know in order to provide the best solution possible? So things you might want to consider here is not only having your list of requirements, but have a couple of examples of what that looks like when it is put in use. What are the workflows for this? What is a user story or expectation for this requirement? You also want to make sure early on in the process that you are setting up communication and expectations with those third parties who maintain the services and other products that you want your site to integrate with. A lot of times, these are the things that are out of your control. Neither you, the library, nor your development partner can control how soon other people outside either of these entities respond to something. So if there's any need for collaboration there, or access to APIs or other interfaces, you want to make sure you're setting up that expectation early and providing a conduit for clear communication. You also want to make sure you have identified any requirements from outside agencies. So again, municipalities, any organization that is overseeing your library. What are the requirements there as far as security, ongoing requirements, testing, things like that? You want to make sure that is clear from the get-go. Next is design. And we often hear that this is everybody's favorite phase, just because this is where you really start to see things come together for the first time. And this is where you can dream big. So during design, what you should be asking, as much as possible. This is a collaborative process between you and the designer and the developer, and it's where you are establishing what the final project will look and feel like. So if you have any questions about how things are going to function or how they should be laid out, or anything that you're like, this would be a cool feature, what about if we did this? Ask it early so that it's already there in the process. Now, remember, some of those responses to that would be maybe not, maybe this isn't possible, maybe this is a better solution here, or even that wasn't included in the scope. So if you want to do that, maybe it's still the most efficient and cost effective time is to plan for it now. But just be prepared to understand that managing scope creep is important here as well. But you should be dreaming big here. You should be sharing those inspirations that you've had. You should be looking and testing the wireframes that are coming from your designer and making sure that those suit your purposes and suit your workflows. And this is also important that this takes about a month of time, maybe a little bit longer in our typical process. And we would meet weekly with the designer and the clients to kind of go over this. Your responsibility as a library is also to take what was discussed at the meeting, and in between that and the next meeting, make sure you're meeting internally and discussing and evaluating those designs and making sure everybody is on board before you greenlight a design. Development will often start as design is wrapping up, especially for those early stages, setting up site architecture and those types of things. During this phase, as the library, you should be asking how things are going, how things are working, what can be tested now. You should also be expecting regular updates from your developers. We meet weekly with our clients during this phase, but also communicate via email or Slack or other means. You should be fully understanding of what is happening when and what different issues are rising up if any concerns come up. If your developer takes your design and says, great, we'll see you in 3 months, that's a problem. Development should not happen in a vacuum. So during this time, you should be seeing some early tests. Your developer might ask you for different settings changes, things like that as you go along. And what you can also be planning as a library is preparing for content migration. So with the wireframes that have been provided, you have an idea of what your user interface is going to be. You know what your pages, your content templates are going to look like. You can start planning for adapting your current content and creating your new content to go into this as soon as the site is ready. Training and QA. This is where you are asking for anything that is not working as expected. You want clarifications on this. You want fixes for this. You are certifying that the end product is going to meet what the agreed scope was and what your agreed development plan was here. We do training early, oftentimes in the towards the end of the development phase, because we found that it really helps both with that quality assurance testing. It helps with library staff members becoming more familiar with the product, and just leads to an easier launch altogether. I would suggest train many staff members, as many as you need on this. Whenever you have a brand new website and a brand new CMS and a new interface and a new workflow, it is such a great opportunity to bring more people in and empower them to be able to take ownership of content as well. You don't ever want to be in the place where someone on your team gets sick or goes on leave and suddenly no one knows how to do anything. It's like, well, that person's gone. We'll never be able to update the website again. You don't want that happening. So use this as a tool for your staff as well to take ownership of the website. And then finally, start using what you're learning as soon as possible. Don't expect to do a training and then don't touch anything for a month and be able to remember how any of this works. Use it regularly. It's through the practice of doing this that it really cements that knowledge and you become familiar with your website. So if that is the general timeline life cycle of a project, when do you ask for things? When do you ask for new things? How do you manage this? First up, ask as soon as possible. If you have a question about anything during the process, ask as soon as it comes up. It does not benefit anyone to hold off and say, oh, maybe I just didn't understand that and I'm sure it will be fine. Look for clarity in everything. If there are changes to the scope and to the development plan, the later they come in the project, the longer it's going to take to launch and the more it's going to affect the other development. A lot of times these pieces are working with each other. So if you do have to make a change, you want to do it early in the process so that you're not having your developers go back and redo work that has already been done. Also, keep in mind that changes to the scope are going to increase the cost of the project. So that's something that needs to be clear in communication. And you as the stakeholder should know if you are asking for this, the developer will tell you, okay, we can do that. Here's what that is going to cost, and be upfront with that as possible. We already mentioned during QA testing, if things aren't working as expected, it's in scope. This is the time to go back and fix that and make sure that everything is as expected and is going to work well for your public launch and for patrons to use it. You want to make sure everything's taken care of before you get to that point. Now, we talked a little bit about the other type of development project, which is what if you want to make changes later on after the site has already been launched, after the site has already been established. And sometimes those are planned improvements years down the road. Sometimes you launch a new website and it's such a departure from what your staff and your patrons are used to that it inspires them to find all new things that they want. And that's great. Your website is a living entity. It should be able to change to meet your needs. And you can't always plan for everything. Even if you do all of the ideation, even if you do all of the auditing and planning ahead of time, you can't account for everything. So there are going to be times when after a site is launched, you come back and say, yeah, maybe we need to change this, or maybe we need to add this new feature. And that's fine. But what that takes, again, is clear communication and an awareness of budget. What I recommend is you always want to give enough time to see how people are actually using the site. Don't ever do reactionary development where it's like, oh, we launched this a week ago and this, we're seeing a lot of people go here and that means we have to change everything immediately. There might be a case where that's true, but for the most part, give people time to learn to use the new site, both your staff and patrons, see how that is changing over time, and then if you need to adjust things, come back into it. When you are asking for new web development, what's the best way to go about that? You always want to be as clear as possible in your description of what you need the new feature to do and what you are asking. So this includes scope, but also, as mentioned before, you want to provide examples. It benefits us to know exactly why you need to use your website in this particular way, because again, we might have recommendations on how to do that better than what you are envisioning. So provide those examples, provide what your expected workflow is going to be. If it is the case of a bug or something you think is not working, documents how it is working counter to expectations. Take screenshots whenever possible and provide those. And when possible, provide a direct URL if you're getting an error code or something like that. That's going to help your development team find the quickest solution to the issue. And then always be open to those alternative solutions. So we said early on, your development partner is responsible for providing you with accurate information and good application of best practices. They may have something that you would never have considered that is going to be a more cost-effective solution for you. So listen when they offer suggestions as well. When you are budgeting for new development moving forward, always have a planned budget for those out of scope work. It's when you're building your RFP and your budget, it is useful having a little bit of a buffer there because things are going to come up that you might say, we never considered this as part of the scope, but we want to go ahead and do this. There's also, you should be considering the upkeep of your website so that it's not the same upkeep as your physical buildings, but your website has as much importance as your physical buildings. And so you can't necessarily just say, we're going to throw a bunch of money at this once and then never think about it again. You know, you've got to do maintenance. You've got to make sure that you're able to expand this as needed. So another way to kind of prioritize those features as they come up to make sure you're not doing that reactionary development, keep a list of nice to have features. So especially for larger library systems, if someone comes and says, I want this, I want the website to be able to do this, add it to the list, talk to your other library members, see if this is something that will benefit everyone, see if this is a consistent request, not just a kind of flash in the pan type of thing, and prioritize that list based on what is going to be the most effective for your staff and for your patrons. And then you can go through, and when you have the budget, you can start ticking things off that feature list for future developments as needed. Again, your development partner should be very clear in upfront in how they are estimating costs for development. At MugoWeb, we bill hourly, so we will tell you, we have a flat rate for you, and we will tell you, based on the scope here, this is how much this will cost. This is how long it takes. This is how much those hours cost. And then if that is not feasible for you, there can be some back and forth there with, okay, what features does this can be taken away? Can we look at a MVP for this? What is necessary? And sometimes there might be a better non-development solution out there, whether that's just changing a workflow within the library or using a feature on the website in a slightly different way. So be open to those suggestions as well, and be open to having a little bit of creativity around that if budget is an issue. All right, so this is some advice that I reached out to some of our current clients and said, if you could go back in time and tell your previous self lessons that you learned from doing this development project, what would you tell your previous self? And by far, the biggest one is just ask. Ask for anything. If you have any doubts, you need any clarity, or if you just want to know, hey, is it possible to do this? Ask straight up. Feel free to ask. Seek those clarifications. Ask for demos and examples early on. If something isn't clear, say, hey, can I see, well, that looks on another site, or can you explain a little bit more about how this works? And then this is very important. And again, sometimes not something you have full control over, but if you are in a development relationship where you do not feel comfortable asking these things, then maybe that isn't the development partnership you need. I also asked some of our developers what they wished they could tell clients early on in the process. And this was very interesting to get responses to. Um, I think one of the big ones here is just learn to trust your developer to give you the advice on best practices. Um, I am sure there are development partners out there that, maybe you wouldn't trust as much here. But when it comes to Mugo Web, we really do want to build you the best solution and the most cost effective one. We don't want to develop something that you're not going to actually use or that is not going to present your library in the best way to your patrons. So if we come back and say, we see you're asking for this feature. Here's how other sites handle this. Here's how the current trends in development are working. These are the best practices that are established. Listen, we know what we're doing. We want to set you up for the best success possible. And so we're not going to lead you astray. So trust your developer. When it comes to APIs, a lot of times third-party library products in particular, it has an API, so it's just assumed, great, we can do whatever we need to do with that because the API exists. But unfortunately, a lot of times APIs do not have good documentation, which means the functionality might be there, but it's going to take some time to sort through it and some time going back and forth with the owners of the other third-party product to make sure that it is working in the appropriate way. So just plan on some integrations, take time. This is why we start the discovery process early with those. Sometimes also things that happen on a website are not code issues. So we will build you a website that is going to be responsive and quick and function. And sometimes things happen to it and we panic and we contact people and say, this is down. And really our Wi-Fi got unplugged or something. Things happen. Everybody understands that. But just make sure that you're also checking your internal conditions and documenting issues as they come up. And then also this applies to coming into an existing project. It takes time to really understand previous implementations, particularly if it is a different developer than who originally did that. So understand the development process takes time, and that's important to make sure that everyone understands what's going on. And again, finding that best solution possible. So that's what your developers wished you knew. All right, we have reached the end of our presentation. If you have any questions, you are welcome to put those into the chat and I will address those. But otherwise, this will be sent to you. This is going to be available on demand and you have my contact information. So if you have questions, please feel free to reach out. We're always happy to share our knowledge with you. And as mentioned, this is just one of a series of webinars. Some of these others might have been beneficial to you as well. So please check those out. And we hope this was helpful for you today.